Hi, yeah, so as Adam said, my name is Ben Sabin. I am a narrative designer and writer. Actually, I'm all cyclist, so I don't know what I'm going over it now. My talk is, don't fade to black, why games should embrace sex. Quick content warning, I'm going to swear. It's just going to happen, I can't stop that, so if you're sensitive, sorry. There's going to be questionable images and bad jokes all throughout, and there will be minor spoilers for Baldur's Gate 3, because I'm pretty sure every talk has included it. Nothing major, no plot points, don't worry, just some talk about characters. So, who the hell am I? As I said, I've been a professional narrative designer for about 5+ years. I started in romantic mobile games, actually, same as Anna, it was Love Island, so I wrote some of that stuff, and that was good fun. I specialize now in characters, romance, and sex. I have written a lot of smut. I'm proud to say that because it's good fun. I'm also, outside of that, a keen role player, both tabletop and live action, make of that what you will. I do leatherwork as a hobby, which is something I don't usually tell people anymore because they immediately ask me what kink stuff I can make for them. I can barely make wallets. I'm not moving into stuff that goes on people. And they do obviously do other things, but it's not relevant to this talk. So, first, what is sex? Here's a little comic. Now, when you Google that, you get a lot of random definitions. You get a lot of bad, just boring science things. Oh, it's when a male and a female of a species inseminate one another, blah, 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 blah. There's lots of definitions out there, and so I'm going to add some one myself. Sex to me is a shared connection between two or more people. It's an expression of vulnerability and openness. We're literally often allowing someone to put something of theirs into something of ours. It can be done out of feelings of love, lust, frustration, anger, excitement. Any strong emotion can basically turn us on. Once we strip away the biological reasons for having sex, i.e. making babies, we're left with a wonderful world filled with pleasure and all sorts of possibilities. A world where we can be a different person to the one that we present in our day-to-day lives, which is kind of like why the stereotype of the mild-mannered office worker actually fucks like a champ. Here's some art. Going back to Anna's talk. So yeah, ever since our cave-dwelling ancestors realized how good it felt to suck and fuck, we as a species have been obsessed with getting our rocks off with whomever and whatever we can, for better and worse. And with that desire and that drive, we also needed ways of sharing our passion for shagging, i.e. this lovely collection of ancient antiquities. But then with the invention of moving pictures came the first porno, and I apologize to all French speakers, including Anna. Le Coucher de la Nerie, which was made in 1896. So inevitably, with the invention of the computer game, came pornographic games. Now, porn games are nothing new. They existed pre-internet. There was cracked Nintendo games that could be played on Ataris and stuff, which had very questionable content on them. They also existed on now vintage websites, which hurts my soul to say, websites like Newgrounds. Basically, if there's a new platform to put porn on it, people will do that. Then on more mainstream platforms, you could, for a long time, only find porn games on sites like itch.io. But they've since flooded Steam since being allowed on there. You don't have to type anything really before a sex game will appear on your Steam search list. And so here's some examples of those. I've also included, you can see the Whispers there. That's actually a mobile porn game. And they work a bit differently. They're more like traditional smut literature, except obviously there's animation, there's artwork, and often the player, the reader, has the ability to customize their avatar and even sometimes customize the love interest, their appearance. So that's quite neat. But that's a whole separate talk. I'm not really going to be touching about that because there's all sorts out there. You've probably seen the terrible adverts on Facebook, if anyone's still on that website. It's that kind of stuff. And look, these games hold nothing back. The next slide, I don't know whoever passed out from seeing The Witcher's feet, but fair warning for the next slide. There you go. Now, if you'd ever told me that when I was hanging around Goldsmiths when I was 18, that one day I'd be giving a talk here, which included a picture of a cartoon cat girl with the Goldsmiths logo for a butthole, I would have said, well, of course I would. That's exactly where my career is going to go. But look, as you can see, whatever your kink, there is something you can find on there through Steam, through other platforms that allow port. And now, some of these games have somewhat in-depth character stories. Others are much more just there for porn. Both are fine in their own right. So, next I'll look at one that actually has some. Now, it's going to surprise you when I say it. There is some depth to this. It doesn't look good, I promise I know this. But first off, this is from a game called Sometime Saga, and I will be front up and honest when I say it is a problematic game. There is a lot of questionable stuff in that game. This was the one example of something, when I say that, I'm talking about, think, the humor from the devs is kind of mid-2000s edgelord shit, so, you can tell where that's going. But here we have a character called Eve. And Eve is actually a somewhat decent go at writing a trans character. And as I put it this way, in a game where you can shag your teachers, your stepmom, and even Uncle Trump for some reason, it's not bad, as a story. It's also clearly coded that she's trans from the get-go. You don't know what's up with her, but there's something clearly up there. She comes across as your awkward kind of teenage goth girl. She's very insecure, she has some issues, etc., etc. But it only becomes clear why this is when you get to this scene and she undresses. I was not prepared to see this screen. I was not prepared to be given this choice to keep Eve trans. And I think the only reason that the developers, this is just me speculating, the only reason they didn't just make her trans straight off the bat is because of potential backlash from their audience. There will be a lot of guys playing this who don't want that. That's just what they chose to do. And if you do pick the option to give her a vagina, her story makes a lot less sense. Basically, it's that she has a small scar on her abdomen from a car crash. And yes, granted, that can make you insecure about your body, but it just doesn't read as right as when she's trans. So Eve's story comes across as one of acceptance and overcoming fear of persecution. Now, I say this as a non-trans person. An actual trans person may read this story very differently. I also don't know if anybody on the production team are trans themselves. They all keep their identities hidden. And obviously, there's also an ongoing debate in media in general of people from other backgrounds, should they even have the right to, tell these stories? It's not their stories to tell. That's this whole other subject. I'm not touching on that tonight. But the reason I bring this up is, as far as character growth is concerned, Eve definitely has a character arc. She's a virgin when she meets the player, something that's a very common theme in these games. And the act of being accepted, found desirable, and the eventual sexy times you have with her help Eve grow out of her awkward shell, help her self-deprecating self. She becomes this more powerful person because of the romance and the sex that the player has with her. And again, I'm not arguing that this is well done or that this isn't cliche. I'm just saying it exists, and it's something that exists. There is character growth here. Unlike the next game I'm going to talk about, called Subverse. Now, Subverse uses their own system called the Pandora system. Here, basically the idea is when you unlock a love interest, you will unlock various scenes with that love interest. Now, what they basically want you to do is, let's say I'm going to start with a blowjob in that first slot, then I'll move to cowgirl in that second slot, then I might have another character's sex scene, I'll put her here, etc., etc. You can essentially handcraft your own porno with these characters that you unlock through the story. There is no character growth here. There's nothing, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying that's how it is. This is purely, these characters exist purely to be fucked. And the whole gameplay revolves around unlocking more of their scenes. The character arc starts outside the bedroom and ends in the bed. So those are how some of the porn games approach this way of helping players get themselves off. Now, but let's talk about sex, plot, and characterization. So the examples I've given so far have all come from dating sims or games adjacent to them. But what can other games outside that genre take from them? Here are 3 characters from the recently released and phenomenal Baldur's Gate 3 by Larian. The first one we have, in Baldur's Gate 3, you are, like any standard RPG, tasked with stopping the big bad, and a lot of other shit that happens along the way. But one thing that Larian is particularly well known for is its characters and the character storylines. And so, during your time, you will During the course of your adventure, you assemble a motley crew of misfits, retrobates, and the occasional white knight. They all have their own stories, their struggles, and their desires. They all have something deeper about them that the player can find out by getting close to them. The core group are all romanceable, something we call in the industry player sexual. So we'll start off with Lazelle. She is a fierce warrior who thinks the inhabitants of the mortal plane are hideous inferior beings. Yet, she finds herself drawn to you. She can't explain it, but doesn't care. She just knows that she wants you. So she comes on very strong. Initially, the sex is very functional. It serves a purpose. And you can choose whether you let her dominate you or turn the tables and dominate her. The sex scenes with her are very, forceful. They're very, impactful. They fit her as a character. But then as the story progresses, Lazelle finds her feelings for you growing deeper until the occasional hookup isn't enough. This coincides with her softening as a character, as a whole, and seeing past the brainwashing her species have done on her, seeing the beauty of the mortal realm. You literally can fuck her into no longer being a massive racist. It's just true. Then there's Astarion, sad boy vampire. He is a seducer by nature. He's easy to romance like Lazelle, but he's a lot more submissive and playful initially. The first scenes with him are him letting the player pick him up and carry him around, and there's a little bit of a threat, that he might bite you because again he's a sad boy vampire. It's all very playful, very different from Lazelle. However, he then later reveals that he's actually trying to manipulate you, and it was working until he fell for you. Ah, shock. But Astarion is lost. He's not had a real relationship in 200 years. He still feels like he's manipulating you. He doesn't know how to not do that. There's vulnerability there. And towards the end of his arc, with the reassurance that you do want to be with him forever, he becomes a little bit more dominating. He starts to relax. He's no longer afraid. So there's a scene where he takes the player from behind and then lovingly pushes them onto the bed and into a missionary position. There's a force of will he suddenly has because he's no longer that feeling of insecurity around you. Astarion is all about putting the past behind him, a theme a lot of the characters have. He's faced trauma beyond his comprehension, but his relationship with the player heals him. And I mean, literally, the last sex scene with him, he fucks you on his grave. So that's literally as far as you can put the past behind you. And then the last one is Karlach. So Karlach, I also lost the mouse. I found it again. So Karlach has been trapped in hell for 10 years. And when she's forced to fight demons at the behest of the devil, she eventually escapes, and when she does, she discovers that she can't actually touch anyone without burning them, causing them actual physical pain because she runs so hot. And what's nice is when you first get with her, she's a very outgoing character. She's very friendly. She's very funny. And when you get with her, when you start down the romance path, there's a lot of teasing to be had. There's a lot of playfulness because you can't actually touch her. So there's lots of her bemoaning, how pent up she is, and you can talk to her seductively about all the things you'd like to do to her, and then she has to be like, "Please stop! I can't take this anymore." You can even throw water on her so you can get a quick kiss. I talk a lot. She aches and longs to be with you, and I often talk about the slow build-up when it comes to sex and romance in stories. And Karlach is, I think, the literal definition of it. Every conversation is laden with that repressed lust. And so by the time that the two of you do eventually get to have physical intimacy, she jumps you. The scene is a lot more frantic than the other scenes that you'll see when you play the game. You're both rolling on the ground, changing who's on top at any given time. And she moans with every minor thrust because to her, this is the longest and worst dry spell being broken, And so it's finally, you see it. You see a lot of character development in a 20-second scene. So, is the sex necessary in telling these stories? In my opinion, yes. I don't think you'd have ended up with the same emotional depth of the characters without them, honestly. So why is it important? Well, the big word, which I realise is actually now very much at the bottom here, is representation. So I'll speak from personal experience. I only realised I was bisexual in my late 20s. Well, I mean, that's a lie. I knew I was, but keep it down, keep it hidden. Because when I grew up in the 90s, the attitude was very much, it's okay to be gay, so long as you're not. The repression of my sexuality has led to trauma and missed opportunities. And the simple fact is, I didn't know what bisexual even was. Like, that wasn't a word in my vocabulary. You know, we exist in so many fucking binaries that we were taught it's either gay or straight. There's nothing in between, no spectrums here. That was, what, 30 years ago? And even, yeah, whatever. So what helped me discover my sexuality? Badass. This man is Dorian Parthus and his glorious shiny ass. I played Dragon Age Inquisition around the time a lot of change was happening in my life. I'd just married my wife. I'd also then come back from my honeymoon to be made redundant. I then had to move. And on top of all this, I was realizing I had a lot more trauma built up inside me and was using a therapist to unpack all that. So there was a lot going on. So to get away from this, I played Dragon Age Inquisition. And at first I was romancing one of the female love interests. But the minute I met Dorian, I was hooked. I was like, yes, I want him. He's great. And Dorian provided a safe space for me to explore my sexuality. He was charming, he was witty, he was funny, and most importantly, he was non-judgmental. There was nothing in this game judging you for the choices you made with who you wanted to be with. Through romancing Dorian in the game, I was able to see how much my desires were normal. The desires I had were normal, and they were okay. I could finally allow myself to have a crush on the guy. Now, there's no sex scene as such in this game. The picture you see here is about as far as it goes. It's an implication that something happens. But going back to Baldur's Gate 3, I would have loved to have seen a more in-depth scene with Dorian, not just because I'm thirsty as fuck, but because I want to know what kind of lover he is. I have to just use my imagination now. Oh, whoa. Good thing I'm a writer. Now, I'm going to say something next that's a bit controversial, but I promise I have a point. I also kind of want to troll any film students that are here. Sex in films is gratuitous. Suck it. Sex in films seems to exist purely because they can get away with it. In an age before internet porn, this was one way for people to go and see some tits and to boost ticket sales. No, sex should not be banned from films. It just shouldn't exist for the sake of existing. The same thing I would say about games. This film here, Ecstasy, was the first ever film to show a sex scene. And when it came out in 1933, it was revolutionary, and it was heavily banned and censored. It challenged the public's attitude around sex and nudity, not least, I think, because the woman is clearly enjoying herself. Sin. But also because she's clearly being eaten out within an inch of her life by that man, a true hero. Move to something, and look, I'm not a film buff, so some of these references are dated, I don't care. Move to something like the 2000 film, What Women Want. And no, it's not a good film, and yes, Mel Gibson is a terrible, awful person, but this sex scene with Marissa Tomei serves a purpose. It's humorous, first and foremost, but it also shows how Nick, Mel's character, uses his power to hear women's thoughts to improve his ability to please a woman. He then goes on to use his power in the absolute worst ways, because this is a film from 2000, but the point in this scene had a reason for existing. It did something. It gave us character growth, though flawed, and additional plot. Juxtapose that with a scene from 2012 Skyfall, and I know I'm cheating by using a Bond film here, I don't care. This scene is just bloody awful. This woman has just revealed to Bond that she's a sex slave. She's always been a sex slave. She's grown up in an unimaginably cruel world. Bond then does Bond stuff that saves her. We then see her enjoying a hot shower, and Bond, without any warning or preamble, sneaks into the shower, and then they fuck. Even as an idiot 21-year-old, I could see how dumb this was, because it screamed male fantasy. I know, Bond, yes, I know. And it existed for no other reason than let's get some tits on screen. And also, not for nothing, I'm pretty sure she dies immediately after this, so add her to the other Bond girl corpse pile. But why is it therefore so much more acceptable in a film to have these moments than it is in a game? Some may argue artistry, but I think it's just because it's been around for nearly 100 years. And what once was an artistic statement that challenged the public has instead become a soulless corporate attempt to grab more money from us. And the other thing that, film cannot do, and even TV shows cannot do, is something really important, which is put you in that room, in that environment, you in the story, which is something games are uniquely placed to do. Which is why I went on that diatribe about films. Because games their point of view can be, either point of view of a camera shot, but also point of view of a person existing in that space. Point of view of what the player or the viewer watching is seeing and experiencing. There are whole genres in porn, POV. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about are games that are uniquely placed as a medium to allow the player to be the center of the story. The character is a literal avatar of you, or a different version of you. Therefore, the stories and relationships in games can resonate on a deeper level with the players than they may within film or TV. That's why I think sex in games can be so powerful. As my own example shows, had I grown up in a different time, like now, when I was just discovering myself, could I have used games to experiment with my sexuality and realize where I lay earlier? Absolutely. You can see men kissing on TV, and back then it still made the papers. But that was kind of more voyeuristic. I was watching two men, I wasn't one of them. I truly believe that games have the ability to connect with their players and can be a real tool for good, allowing people to express themselves in ways they just couldn't otherwise. So why do games shy away? Well, there's many valid reasons for the games to stay away from sex. Age rating. They want to sell to a wide audience. The minute you have nudity, your age rating goes up. Porn and nudity is restricted and illegal in many countries. And even in countries where it's not, you have to be careful about certain archaic, bloody laws that may or may not exist. But someone in this department heard that there might be a law around erect penises being on screen. But anyway, so yes, it's a complicated subject. Budget. Animation is expensive. And therefore, sex isn't viewed as an important part of the story. So let's just fade to black. Easy. Therefore, the writers, the storytellers can still get their sex in the game, but we don't have to see it. So I don't want to pay for that animation rig. Devs can be uncomfortable. Not everyone wants to work on a game that has sex in it because of societal reasons. Well, we've already talked about touched upon. It can be hard to recruit for a game that has these themes. And there's also a few decent mainstream examples to learn from. Baldur's Gate, when I say it, is really out there in terms of what it's done. I mean that. It's gone beyond the artistic. It's just straight up showing nudity for a good reason, but it's not usual. But if we don't do it, someone will. As I said, games can connect with people in a unique way, and that can be a force for good. But it can also be extremely toxic, instilling in people harmful behaviors or taking on damaging, dangerous attitudes. There's lots of sex in games out there already. The issue is too many of these games are created by the same white, cis, straight dudes. And at best, this leads to a lot of bland sexual content, or the love interests of the same six white women. And at worst, they're a breeding ground for unacceptable behaviors and views. A lot of these games out there are badly written, treat their female characters as little better objects treat their female characters as little better than objects to fuck, because that's literally what they are. They have zero agency to accept or reject the player. And a lot of them include a lot of offensive content. Racism, sexism, sexual assault are just to name a few. Even when I was selecting screenshots for this presentation, I had to be careful, as a lot of these characters are purposely made to look underage. That is a thing, and it's a common issue I found when researching these games. Some may not view any of what I said as an issue, it's just a game. But as I was saying earlier, we absorb the media we're exposed to. We're a narrative-driven species. Folklore and folk heroes carried us through the centuries. What I'm getting at is, if an impressionable enough person plays one of these games and identifies strong enough with the themes or the characters, there's a potential that helps shape their outlook on sex and how to treat people. That should be a good thing. But if the examples they have of what we're showing now, that could be a really bad thing. There's also huge communities where players can connect with others. Again, nothing wrong with this in theory, but it doesn't take long to scratch away the surface of these places and find that they're literally just hangouts and recruitment hotspots for incels and Nazis. So, to conclude, how to do, there's a stereo in the scene I was telling you about, thinking from behind. I will deliver. How to do it well. Make it relevant. Sex should be entwined with a character and their personality and arc. It shouldn't just be in the game for the sake of it. That's what films are for. But in general, if your game includes adult romance, I think that's usually a green light to include sex. Commit, don't fade to black. If you're going to have sex in your game, then go for it. Don't fade to black. This doesn't mean you have to be explicit. It's actually better not to for the sake of legality, as I said. But you can get away with a more artistic approach, so change your camera angles, etc. Talk to your film nerd friends. Forgot a point. As I said, Baldur's Gate is not faultless. They do actually legit fade to black at one of the scenes. And I think it's because it would have been a really expensive scene to animate. So I get it, but maybe just don't offer that choice. Likewise, they flip between the artistic and the very explicit dramatically for some of the scenes. Yes, draw on your own experiences. As I said earlier, we need more diverse voices putting their experiences out there, both good and bad. This isn't a talk on how you get there, but more when you are there, keep this in mind. What's it like, for example, for an asexual or a demisexual person to have sex? I know some experiences from my friends who identify as such. What's it like for a disabled person to have sex? These are things that, these are stories that should be out there, that should be explored, that shouldn't be shied away from. And we also definitely need better poly representation out there. It's all about destigmatizing sex and the ways people can enjoy it. Tell a story through the sex. Show the player what the avatar or the people they're having sex with are going through. Are they subs, doms, brats, etc.? It's tied to the first point, but it's worth repeating. Bring experts in if you can. Larian actually brought on a couple of intimacy coordinators to help them with their sex scenes, something that I think definitely enhanced the game, and is probably the reason why I'm up here talking and praising it so much. And lastly, just show the joy and fun. Sex is great. There's no joke to follow that up with. For a lot of people, though not everyone obviously, sex is one of the best feelings they can experience. As a Western society, we're still very conservative when it comes to nudity, and the idea that sex is something to be enjoyed. It's time that games really took their place in championing people boning down. And with that last thoughtful statement, Finn?
Do we have any questions?
I want to ask, can we publish a game includes sex but not showing sexual parts for under 18 years old?
I'm not a lawyer. I wouldn't be able to give you that answer. I would honestly say, speak to a legal representative about that. Really dig into why you want to show that. Again, don't do it for the sake of it. Don't do it for shock value. If there's a genuine reason why, talk to a lawyer. I can't give you any advice on that.
Oh, okay, thank you so much.
There was one? Yeah.
Hi. When you mentioned how a character can really create a safe space for play to explore sexuality from a personal experience, I think that was beautiful. But to do to do more things like that, how do you really portray sexual scenes without appealing just as a fantasy, or to appeal to some kind of gazes, or to just work as titillation in the game? How do you really portray that?
So do you mean how do you make it more in depth than just okay. Yeah. I think that's I think it comes from the romance side of things, right? When you have a successful romance story, it's because the sex is a big part of it at some point, but really what it is about is two people connecting, just like in real life. It's two people who meet each other, fall in love, whatever, and you have those cute moments. I'll give you another example in Baldur's Gate. There's one of the romantical characters called Shadowheart. You don't have sex with her until the very end, but you have this long-running romance where you have multiple little moments where you have wine with her, or you go swimming with her. And it's about being there. The character has to be written in a way that supports the player as much as the player character is supporting them. You can make it feel like a real relationship, and so when the sex does happen, it feels like it does in real life. Unless you are just talking about hooking up. If you're just hooking up, then you just have the sex scene, whatever, and you make it again part of the story. But if you actually want the players to feel depth, it comes from all the preamble. Which is why I was talking earlier about, you have to play the long game when it comes to sex in any media. Honestly, it needs to feel, the player needs to feel like they got a reward for everything, you know.
Thank you.
I think there's one just there.
Yeah.
So I used to work in the adult industry, but not in games. And something that is a problem throughout the industry is taking payments, basically, being blacklisted by banks, payment providers, PayPal, all of that stuff. And I was just wondering if you have any knowledge on perhaps when itch.io and Steam started to allow games, how that affected accepting payments, and any advice onto how people who maybe want to create adult games can go about navigating the payment challenges when monetizing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I didn't realize that was a thing. That's frankly absolute bullshit.
It is the biggest issue with any adult content ever.
That's crazy to hear. As far as I'm aware, no, I will be honest, I don't do the biz dev side of things. Like, obviously, some of my clients I work with who do adult content, you know, they get paid fine. I think once you're on a platform like Itch or Steam, my understanding is at that point, you know, you get the payments as a dev through just as any other dev would. There's no blacklisting or discrimination in that sense. So it sounds like it's a much more stable way of getting paid rather than, you know, when you're working in the adult industry. Yeah, you shouldn't have to worry about that per se, because I've never heard of anything like that.
Any other question?
I know focus is here on sex, but I've kind of brought it slightly to sex and relationships. In video games, often the way sex is kind of treated as the ultimate prize, and it's very transactional. And it's like, you know, basically fill up the presence meter, hooray, you get to bang the alien or whatever it is. And yeah, that's kind of like really one-dimensional and really simplistic, obviously compared to like real relationships. Can you name any kind of like games that have like a better relationship system, for lack of a better phrase there?
Yeah, well, I think I talked about one fairly extensively. Being Baldur's Gate. Now, Baldur's Gate does use an affinity system, but that just is purely there to basically the way I think the devs have used it is to track which person you're interested in. Because I've designed systems like that, because at a certain point you stop getting the so-and-so disapproves, so-and-so approves, because it no longer matters. At that point they have the information of where the player is interested and they can focus on that person. And I noticed that dropping off in, say, like in Act 2 and Act 3. Act 1 is where that kind of like earning the affinity of a person comes into effect. So what you're saying is absolutely true. Sex is very transitional in a lot of games, and that's where we need to be different. And I think one way you do that is, you know, you have that, let's say you're casting a net, and that is your affinity system. And then once the player has, you know, caught the love interest or love interests that they want, you can then branch you can then have branches of like, if Lazel's affinity is 50 plus whatever, you will see this, or you will get this scene. But once the player has then in that scene you're given conditions like, I want to be with you, or I want to see other people. You then have other variables that you can branch on later, and that become a lot more important. That's obviously, it's hard work, and it's a lot to keep track of, and it can be very clunky. So far, that's the best system I've seen deployed. There's lots of people trying to do like big character matrices, and you can get very intricate about it. But I'm over time, so I don't want to start breaking down those. But yeah, there are ways of doing it, and I think, as I said, I would just look at how Baldur's Gate do it, because they do it really well. There are other games out there, I can't think of any off the top of my head that have also done it very well. But yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
No.
Hi, I heard you talk a little bit about intimacy coordinators in Baldur's Gate 3, which is unsurprising, I guess. I wanted to ask, I know it's a relatively new field, even in film, and I guess I wondered if you had a sense of whether, I guess, how advanced it was in games, if it was something only quite big devs were doing, or actually much more indie devs, or if any insight you had on that.
Yeah, I'm afraid to say I don't have a lot of insight on that. Like, I only know they did that because there was an article published about how they did it, and the intimacy coordinators, there was a picture taken from development where they drew the characters in different poses, and they were like, well, this person's very dominating or whatever, so like we could see them wanting to approach the character in this way, etc. As for, I've never heard of it being done. No, I'm sure it has been done. I just haven't heard it from other studios. It is the kind of thing where indie studios wouldn't necessarily have the budget to bring on a full person like that, even if for a temporary consultation. So if it was done before, it probably would have been done in the bigger studios that have the money to do that, if it was valued enough. But that's the question of like, has it been valued enough? I would say no. I'm hopeful that come the future, we will see more of that. We will see more outside perspectives coming in and being able to give their actual trained expertise on these kind of subjects. Because that's the way I think, we will advance this particular, and actually all issues in the industry. So yeah, hopefully that gave you some kind of answer.